Oh, and I've also been interning at a case at JMU over the summer with Remy, so had a lot of good experiences with that.
That's so nice of you to say, Jake. I can leave if you want to talk honestly about it. I'm just kidding. Okay. Let's see.
Clothes have been collecting a lot of dust on them in that high bay, Remy, moving boxes.
My goodness. I know. At least you're getting some academic experience with John, even though I'm just working your physical moving boxes skills. Looks like Nick hopped onto the Teams by mistake, so I redirected him. He should be on in a minute. We'll see. Um, but yeah. So Bella, I'm sorry I missed you while I was up in Colorado.
I know. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I missed you too. Dylan and I have been on the road almost every other week in Arizona, so it's definitely been very busy. So, but did you have a good time here?
Yeah, we had a nice visit. It's like everybody in the world that is in Colorado was not in Colorado while I was there. So it was funny. But yes, we had fun. We spent some time in Denver, and then we went up to Vail and Glenwood Springs for a bit, and then we were in Boulder for the ACES Solar Conference. Um, and we got to see some of our friends from NREL and things like that. But it was a nice trip, and the whole family was there, so it was nice.
Awesome.
Yeah. But I don't know. I sent Nick the code. Maybe I thought he was joining us. But well, I'll go ahead and just get started, not to, waste time here, but usually we start each of our calls with a little bit of an update from around the Repowering Schools network. And so I just wanted to share some slides that I put together that really highlighted our last student symposium. So last week we were in Colorado at UC Boulder for the ACES Solar Conference. And this is just an example of what a student symposium and some conference experience looks like. We put together a panel of industry for the students. We had like 15 students there from around the country and actually around the world. We had some international students with us, so that was really exciting. And 5 amazing panelists who spoke with the students about what they do in their career journeys. We also got to go on a cool field trip to go see Jack's Solar Farm, which is an agrivoltaics learning center, as well as a residence that has solar. And we got to travel in an electric bus the whole time. It was really cool. And then the students also had the opportunity to present their research during a poster session during the conference. So there's a couple of our students presenting their work. You may recognize somebody in here. And then they also got to participate in the very first ACES career fair, which was an exciting opportunity for them to practice those elevator pitches and talk to folks they might want to work with in the future. So I just wanted to kind of lead off with that and then remind everybody that we will be at RE+ in Las Vegas next month. It's coming up really fast, but we're really excited to have about a dozen students joining us in Las Vegas, and we'll also be co-hosting with the Clean Energy Leadership Institute the young professionals gathering and meetup. So those will be fun events while we're there. And then we will have applications opening soon for our conference experience at IPF, which is our offshore conference in February in New York City. And then our distributed wind conference, which is our student wind symposium. So it's a student symposium around wind-based research and education that's held in Arlington in February. And as always, just a reminder to please go to YouTube, subscribe to our channel so you can see all of these recordings after if you were not able to make the call. So lots of things on there. There's network calls, but there's also other webinars from the past, and our awards program videos are on there. So lots of things to check out. And then with that, I'm going to turn it over to our speakers for today. But before we get started, since it's a small crowd, you've already met Jacob, but Nick, would you like to introduce yourself quickly before they get started?
Hi, yeah, my name is Nick. I am a rising senior at JMU in the engineering department, and I am interning at CASE, which is the Center for the Advancement of Sustainable Energy. And I recently attended the ACES Solar Conference in Boulder as well. I assume that's what you were talking about.
It sure was.
Yeah, a pleasure to be here. It's nice to meet you all.
Awesome. Well, look, this is all a bunch of JMU grads in the room. Isn't that great? Or almost grads. So yeah, so I'll turn it over to you guys and I'll stop sharing my screen because I know you had some slides you wanted to put up.
Awesome. Thanks, Remy. Let me just pull up these slides right here.
Yeah. And while you're pulling that up, just are either of you planning to be at RE Plus?
Unfortunately not. No, I haven't been to that one in a few years. I got to go to ACP, when was that? Back in May in Phoenix. Oh, that's where we met. Yeah.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. That was a good conference. It's RE Plus, we do send, there should be some Apex folks there, but I don't know at this point who's going to be attending, but I can let you guys know.
Yeah, I sent Brian O'Shea an email and he's looking into it. I just thought I'd ask just in case y'all were going to be there.
I wish.
Yeah, I think I'll be in Virginia, actually, in Charlottesville at Apex headquarters, and you'll be out. So,
well, if you're there on early September, maybe you'll see us because that's when we're planning to do our field trip.
oh, awesome. Okay, yeah, maybe I can try to coordinate that. That'd be really fun.
Yeah, we're still trying to work around student class schedules and learning schedule to make sure we can get that planned, but that's in the works for the beginning of September. So.
Awesome. Well, I guess we'll get started. Thanks again for the opportunity to speak to you all. We're really excited to share a little bit about our career path and what we've been working on at Apex. But we'll start with some introductions. So I'll turn it over to Dylan first.
Yeah, thanks, Remy, for inviting us. It's great to get a chance to speak to rising seniors and others that are interested in the industry. So happy to do this. But I'm Dylan Ikkala, Director of Development here at Apex. I've been with the company now for about 9 years. Prior to joining Apex, I did an internship at Invenergy, and I completely missed, but I went to the University of Oklahoma. My degree was in energy management, which is a kind of conglomerate of business, engineering, and a little bit of legal, but it's got a strong focus on oil and gas. A lot of the coursework was oil and gas centric. Going into that degree, I never really wanted to work in the oil and gas industry and always had my mind kind of set on the renewable space, where a lot of OU grads did migrate towards the renewables, which was great. And kind of, I used that as the launch pad to break into the industry, and ultimately got me that internship over at Invenergy prior to joining Apex the next year. But a little bit background on what I've done at Apex. I started working in the SPP region when I first started, mostly in Kansas and Nebraska. And then I spent a good chunk of 3-4 years working in MISO in Minnesota. And then I've been working in the WECC region exclusively for the past about 4 years now. So got good experience in the various markets, and it's been a great opportunity to just kind of understand the differences of the various regions across the US. Just one thing, I know a lot of this with the rising seniors, and you're probably wondering how you can kind of break into the industry, but a little bit on my story. Being at OU, definitely heavy oil and gas, plenty of opportunities to get into that space if I wanted to. Renewables was a little bit more challenging, but I really just networked the best I could via LinkedIn, in close coordination with the director at the energy management program, getting me in contact with folks that are in the renewable space, and then just really following up, finding opportunities, ways to get engaged, and just maintaining those connections for multiple years, just to stay in touch and see if they're hearing anything. And fortunately, I did connect with one individual who graduated in the 80s that spent a bunch of his time in the 90s working in the renewable space, and had some strong connections across the industry, and he was willing to make some calls and emails, and ended up getting me in a really great position and got me a first internship at Energy. So just can't reiterate enough. I think just, you know, finding and connecting with folks, attending seminars, going to conferences, you know, just meeting other industry partners is going to be your ticket to break into this field. And it can feel overwhelming and it is challenging. I'll be the first to confess, but I think just persistence and, you know, leveraging those connections will lead to success.
That's great advice. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, we've got a lot of advice here on the next slides, because I know it's really hard. But I'll introduce myself too. So I'm Isabella Lindblad. I'm a project developer at Apex Clean Energy. I got a Bachelor's of Science in Biology from JMU, go Dukes. And I was involved in a few academic programs and internships at JMU while I was there. So I'm really glad to hear that both of you work at CASE, because I also did when I was at JMU. And I also worked for REMI, you know, with Repowering Schools as a fundraising intern. So that was a lot of fun. And I also was involved in the collegiate wind competition for about 3 years. Unfortunately, I've heard that that is not happening this year, just with everything going on in the DOE and, you know, NREL managing that. So it's tough to hear that it's not happening this year, but there's certainly other academic competitions that you can be involved in.
It is going to happen. Just to note, from what I understand, it's not going away. It's just that NREL isn't supporting it. Like the teams will make it happen. So there's still probably going to be a competition. We just don't know what it's going to look like yet.
Okay, cool. Yeah, well then that's better news than what I was sort of seeing online. So that's perfect. Yeah.
That's my understanding. I could be out of the loop, but yeah.
Okay. Awesome. And so I was a development summer associate at Apex, and I was able to get that extended and just keep my foot in the door. And then I was able to get a, you know, full-time developer position at Apex. And so now I've been working on projects in Colorado, Arizona, New Mexico. And I've really enjoyed interacting with, you know, landowners, getting leases signed, you know, early stage development tasks. That's really what I've been focused on. And you know, I've had a really good time learning about the industry through that lens. And so something I would iterate for, you know, college students that are trying to get into the industry, or of course, you know, doing the internships like you already all have. So that's really good news. And, you know, being involved in either Kid Wind, I know Remy's really involved with that competition. So, you know, organizing that, helping with that, or other, you know, academic competitions that are of your interest. And so Dylan and I have talked a little bit about some ways to get into the industry. I know it's a really hard, you know, hiring market right now as a young professional. So these are just, you know, 3, you know, pieces of advice that we would share with you all. So like we said, you know, being involved in any, you know, extracurriculars at your school, holding leadership positions in those, I think those go a long way. Like I said, Remy is involved with Kid Wind, so she can certainly, you know, plug you in there. I know there's a solar decathlon, you know, the hydropower collegiate competition looks like it's still, you know, going this year. So that's an opportunity there.
Just an update. It's not called solar decathlon anymore. We learned this last week. Jake and Nick can tell you it's called Buildings Next, right? Is that what it's called? But there's also the Solar District Cup. So there is still a solar focused competition. And then the solar decathlon is focusing more on the building science. So they changed the name. Anyway.
Okay. Yeah. And yeah, if, you know, I would of course recommend the collegiate wind competition. So if that is still happening this year, totally, you know, reach out to Remy and get involved with that competition. And, you know, Dylan and I, we had, you know, some summer seasonal internships. So I would certainly recommend applying for those in your area. To sort of build your resume and sort of get your foot in the door and see what aspects of the industry you're interested in. And lastly, of course, is networking. I know that's something that some people either really enjoy or don't enjoy a lot. But I do think it is really important, especially just with the, you know, hiring climate right now, to, you know, go to any career fairs at your school, leveraging any connections that your professors or admin have, any personal connections you have, certainly leveraging those. And going old school with either cold calling, emailing, reaching out over LinkedIn to folks, maybe not, trying to get a specific position, but just, hearing about their career path and, any advice that they have as well.
I'm just gonna sneak in and tell you that there's like a huge thunderstorm coming through. So if for some reason I get knocked off, I'm just gonna make you and Dylan the hosts in case something happens. Okay.
Okay, no worries.
I don't know if something's gonna kick me out.
Virginia weather can be unpredictable, and definitely right now I heard there's been a lot of rain over on the East Coast. So.
Yeah. So anyway, go on. I'm sorry.
Awesome. We'll just give a quick overview of Apex really quickly. So Apex is a utility scale wind solar storage developer. We have projects all across the US. This map shows a little bit of the projects our company is managing, primarily in the Midwest and in Texas. You've got a few dots in Colorado that Dylan and I are working on. And so yeah, this slide just describes the scales that Apex develops projects at. Dylan and I primarily focus on the left-hand side here, the utility scale projects, but we do have distributed energy resource, scale projects that we develop at Apex. So that just shows the different scales that we develop projects at. Something that's unique to Apex that I've really, enjoyed working at this company for is the focus on, conservation. So this is, unique to the industry. Apex has a conservation grant program where for each project that Apex owns, we reserve up to $1,000 per megawatt to fund a conservation program that's local to that area. This is something that our environmental team primarily manages, but this is something I'd like to note that's unique to Apex, unique to the industry, and sort of aligns with a lot of our personal views of preserving the natural environment. And so we've covered, about Apex. We're going to migrate towards talking a little bit about some projects that Dylan and I have worked on at Apex. And then I think after that, we'll talk a little bit about, current events and how different policies are impacting our work today. But first I'll start with this project that I've been working on in Colorado. So this is a solar and storage project. It's up in Routt County, Colorado, which you can see on this map here on the right is a sort of northwest Colorado. This is an up to 150 megawatt solar and storage project. The scale is about 2,000 acres with about 12 landowners. So that's, a little bit of a smaller scale. And so we have a few items here that we want to sort of highlight, the different aspects of development that we have to think about when we're working on these projects. And so first with getting, your local permitting, this county requires that we would get a special use permit and a building permit for the project, and also wanted us to include an environmental mitigation plan. And so that takes a lot of work to permit a project. And so, we just want to make sure that we're hitting all of those things that the county's requesting. So for our environmental items, we have field surveyors go out to the site and understand what potential species this could be habitat for. So we notice that there's, potential for greater sage-grouse habitat, elk and deer migration. So we just work closely with, environmental agencies to understand what are our mitigation strategies for that. This site had some, complex engineering challenges. So there was about 8 transmission lines through the project. And so we have to understand the total easements for those and setback from those. This site was particularly challenged with the slopes throughout the project. So if you understand a little bit about solar development, that makes it particularly challenging. You usually want to have a flat site for a solar project. There's a waterway through the project. And so all of those items sort of made it harder to engineer the project, but not impossible. And some interesting elements about this project's offtake strategy. This was sited directly next to a retiring coal plant, so we tried to understand how we can operate as a generator replacement. So for the utility to transfer the transmission service rights to us. And so this project also included, standalone storage and a co-located option, which, creates advantages. You really want to have optionality when you're developing these projects. So I'll turn it over to Dylan to share his experience with developing a wind project in Minnesota.
Yeah, so this was, I think the intent of these two slides is just really to give kind of the depth of knowledge that development is expected to have. I mean, obviously we have subject matter experts internally and externally that help navigate some more complex issues, but we chose these two projects because I think they just show some of the challenges and obstacles and hoops we got to jump through to get a project from kind of concept to construction. So this was a project I worked on for 4 years. This is in South Central Minnesota. It was an up to 300 megawatt wind farm. This one had quite a few landowners. It was over 80, and it was about a 30,000 acre site. This project also had a long transmission line to get down to the point of interconnect. That posed a lot of challenges as well, with varying views with transmission on their property. We had to change our route about 6 different times, and I think the total leasing process for that was about 2 years to get through and get a final route locked down. This project also had some unique characteristics given the setback requirements that the state of Minnesota has. So good neighbor agreements is what the GNA is. Those were very critical for the success of this project, because if there was one non-participating landowner, it would take out about half a mile in all directions of area where we could site turbines. So if you started to have a lot of non-participating landowners, you would lose a significant amount of area to actually site the turbines on. So those were just an absolutely critical aspect of this project, and we ended up having a lot of success on those at this site. Permitting in Minnesota is a state process through the PUC. It took about 18 months to get from submitting application to getting the permit. There was definitely some downtime in there, but it's definitely a strenuous process, multiple hearings, different locations. We had to obtain 4 different permits. It was 2 for the wind project and 2 for the transmission line. So we had to permit those components separately. There was also some DoD engagement required at this site, given the military training route that cut through the project area. So we had to coordinate with the DoD to reach an agreement there for where they would allow us to site turbines within the training route. Interconnections, obviously another critical piece with development. We had filed an interconnect on all of our development, got through permitting, and found out that the network upgrades on the original POI were significantly higher and uneconomical for the project. So we had to change course. I think the one thing I wanted to highlight here is with this interconnection process, it can take multiple years, and your site control documents aren't valid forever. So when you're kind of banking on one point of interconnect and everything's going smoothly and then it doesn't go as planned, the project can start to crumble pretty quickly. So we had to, get lease extensions for the site control to ensure we had the land rights. We had to update our permit. So it causes a lot of rework and a lot of backtracking to kind of make sure you have the project for the long haul to get through another filing process and ultimately to construction. On the environmental front, we did all the typical surveys: cultural, wetland, raptor nests, avian use surveys. And those had to feed into our applications with the Minnesota PUC. And I think lastly, but I think this was one of the more valuable experiences I got out of this project, is we identified a culturally sensitive area north of our project, and we had to engage with about 18 different tribal entities and different tribes, which was a great experience. And, it took about 2 years to of collaboration to get to a point where we were all in agreement. And, it was definitely a compromise effort where each party had to give a little, and I think we ended up reaching a very positive outcome for that. And the project size did get decreased quite a bit because of this, but at the end of the day, it was the difference between getting a project done and not getting a project done. So I think it was a very positive outcome and very rewarding experience.
Can I ask a question real quick?
Sure.
Like from somebody that's never developed this, it just like strikes me of how complex that process is. And is that something that like Apex has had to develop like a roadmap of how to navigate all these different obstacles that come at you? Or is it like guidance from DOE on how to do this? And I'm sure that it changes county by county too on like what they require.
That's a great question. Is there a roadmap? Not necessarily, because unfortunately every project you work on is going to have its own hurdles and unique characteristics. So it's not a one size fits all per se, but I would say the familiarity on, you're right that counties can have different permitting requirements, but depending on what state you're in, then if like in Minnesota, it's a state process, not a county level process. In Colorado, it's all county level processes, and each county we work in has different permitting requirements and setbacks and regulations that we have to comply with to get our projects in their county. So it's honestly a state by state, county by county, project to project. I've worked on 20, 30 different projects in my time here, and every project has something that I've never seen before. So I think that's what makes development very exciting. And it's not like you wake up every day and you know exactly what's going to happen. You think you go into a week knowing what your week's going to look like, and you get to the end of the week and you're like, wow, I didn't see any of that coming. So it's a really fun industry, and I really have enjoyed being in development. But yeah, I think it's definitely interesting as you experience different states and regions and the dynamics. But I think scheduling is maybe another aspect of your question. And, I think when you look at this, like all the things that you have to achieve, you can't go to permitting until your environmental stuff's complete. And you can't, start construction until you have your DOD and FAA stuff resolved. You kind of have to pace it out. And, these projects can take 3 years to 10 years from start to finish, just depending on where you are and the complexity of the project. But I know Apex is just now starting a construction on a wind project in Virginia. That project was on like year 12 or 13 of development. So it can take a long time to get these projects done. And the harsh reality is a lot of the projects we work on won't ever come to fruition, which is also a frustrating aspect. But you put your blood, sweat, and tears into some of these projects, and they don't ever make it. So that's just something you have to, accept and move on and go to the next one and focus on that one. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Of course. So this slide, I think it's important to see just the magnitude of growth. This is really just kind of focused on 2 different states in the Western region. And there's a lot more to it than just this, but these are the 2 states that Isabella and I work primarily in. But just to kind of give you a magnitude scale, in Colorado, Xcel Energy is releasing RFPs, requests for proposals, about every 2 to 3 years. And they need to acquire about 14 gigawatts of new electricity generation between now and 2033. So in 2023, they procured about 3 to 4 gigawatts of wind. And in this upcoming RFP, they're looking to procure about 7,000 megawatts or 7 gigawatts of wind and 3,000 megawatts of solar. So there's just significant opportunity in Colorado, which is where we have quite a few of our projects. And I think they're all in a great position to capitalize on that. In Arizona, which is another very strategic market for us right now. Both APS and Salt River project are 2 of the main utilities in the state, and they're procuring about 2 gigawatts of solar each per year, and that's over the next 10 years. In conversations with these utilities, they're at about an 8 gigawatt peak load. So middle of the summer, when it's 115 degrees, everybody's got their AC units on. They're at about 8 gigawatts apiece, and both utilities need to basically double that between now and 2035. And just from a unit perspective, I mean, 16 gigawatts of generation is not, it's not a one-to-one for solar and wind just based off the capacity factors. So if you're thinking about bringing on a lot of wind and solar, it's significantly more than 8 gigawatts worth. So there's a lot of opportunity in that state. I think there's a lot of talk around data centers and AI and crypto. These numbers that I just discussed do not include those facilities. And we did just recently have a presentation from APS and SRP, and they have about 16 gigawatts apiece of proposed data center AI crypto load. So in addition to the just base load that they need, there's also all of these new generation opportunities on the horizon, assuming they can get the generation to supply those facilities. I think this is the last slide, but there's obviously a lot of talk and policy at the federal level these days. I'm sure you guys have all been hearing about this, but I thought it'd be worthwhile just to kind of talk through some of these at a high level and how it impacts our business. But I think the first one in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, the PTC is going to be phased out by 2028. That basically means you have to start construction by 2028 in order to capitalize on some of those production tax credits and investment tax credits. These were introduced and extended during the Inflation Reduction Act during Biden's administration. And they do play a very important role in the renewable energy space. All energy generation is subsidized in some form or fashion. So to kind of level the playing field, these were an important aspect of our pricing and staying competitive in the market. We have strategies internally to kind of hedge on some of these and ways to maintain the PTC and ITC eligibility for our assets throughout the next 5 or so years. So I think we're sitting in a pretty good place right now, but I think depending on the company, there could be some challenges on the horizon. After the OBBB was released, an executive order came out which required the Treasury to take a closer look at these tax credits and federal approvals for renewable energy projects. This is something we don't know yet. I think the guidance is supposed to be released in the next week or so. So hopefully nothing too dramatic comes out of that, but time will tell. That could kind of shift my first comment that I made above, depending on where that guidance lands. Another recent change was Department of Interior, which includes the Bureau of Land Management, which is federal land, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Army Corps of Engineers, et cetera. Those are all various entities that we engage with for projects. And the guidance that was passed down was that the Department of Interior was no longer able to collaborate or communicate with developers on wind and solar projects, which obviously poses challenges and causes us to shift our focus and find ways to kind of circumvent some of those organizations if we can. If there is an instance where we absolutely need to coordinate with one of those parties, we'd have to get approval through the DOI to have communications, and they have to review the project. This is obviously a delay and poses challenges and more hurdles for us to overcome. So I think just the renewable industry is very nimble and is constantly adjusting, as most energy industries do. There was also a recent discussion from the Department of Transportation. They are now going to be enforcing, or I don't know if it's official, but they're contemplating enforcing a 1.2 mile setback from all federal highways and railroad tracks. Obviously, these projects that we work on are in rural parts of America a lot of the times, and there are lots of federal highways and railroad tracks in the vicinity. So this is going to eliminate a decent amount of land for us to site turbines or solar panels on. On the Department of Defense front, there's been a little bit of a shift there as well, where wind and solar projects have become deprioritized on their list. So there's definitely been a limiting of engagement with that party, and that's posed some challenges since I know the example I gave for the Minnesota project, we needed to coordinate with the DoD in order to get that project across the finish line. So that's something that we are now factoring into kind of our schedule and considering pulling some of those interactions forward, just knowing that we're going to get put to the bottom of the pile. Tariffs are obviously something that's constantly a moving target, but that really impacts our procurement aspects of our projects and will ultimately just get passed down into our pricing for our projects and the power price that we offer in RFPs. But wind turbines, solar panels, the various components that we need for these projects come from all over the world. So we definitely have a team that focuses on tariffs and shifting vendors, shifting supply chains, those sorts of things to kind of manage that risk. But over on the right, we just have kind of some mitigation strategies. So siting projects on private property, that that circumvents the risk with the Bureau of Land Management, but it ultimately doesn't provide cover from interacting with Fish and Wildlife Service or some of those other entities, depending on the project. Obviously focusing on near-term opportunities and priority projects and advancing as many projects as we can prior to 2028 to capitalize on the PTC and ITC while it's still available. And then, there's always the ability to focus on US vendors for technology. I think the cost of those panels and turbines, they can be higher, but if that's going to be the path forward to get projects done, it's something that the industry is going to have to adjust. So it's constantly a moving target. I think the industry, like I said, is very nimble. We're constantly monitoring policy changes. It feels like it's almost been weekly, as of late. So it's an interesting time for the industry, but I think we're well equipped to weather the storm.
Does the EPA eliminating the solar for all dollars, does that impact you at all when you're distributed work?
That would be a good question for Charlie Johnson. So Isabella and I are on the utility scale side, so we don't really get too involved in the DER side, but so I don't have a solid answer for that one, unfortunately.
No worries. I was just curious.
But I'm sure it does.
Some. Well, that pretty much sums up everything Dylan and I had to share today. So we'd be happy to answer any other questions. We can go a little more in depth in any of the other slides that we had up. But yeah, just interested to hear from you all.
Yeah, before we open it up to questions, I know Natalie joined us a little late. And Natalie, if you're there, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm so sorry. My camera isn't working. My computer's a little old, but
Okay.
hi everyone. I'm Natalie Araujo. I am currently entering my third year at UC Berkeley, and I am an environment and society major as well as a legal studies major. So looking a lot in the legal aspect of renewable energy.
Awesome. Nice to meet you.
Nice to have you here, Natalie. And then I'll leave it to you guys to open it up with any questions. I have my own, but I'll let you guys go first.
I have two quick questions. The first one is for both of you, but kind of primarily Isabella. So I'm on the executive team for the JMU student chapter of the ASCE. And as the semester starts, we're looking at building our schedule for events, and we're looking at like industry speakers to come and talk. And maybe since I know you're in Colorado, I was going to ask if either of y'all would be open for like a Teams meeting with the student chapter of the ASCE sometime this semester.
Yeah, just let us know. We'll have to, schedule that around some other things, but we'd be happy to do that.
Awesome. Yeah, and no offense, but Dylan, but I was just like, yeah, JMU grad, Okay, awesome. Well, I see your contact.
We need some more OU students on the student network. Yeah, that's just what that means.
Awesome. Well, thank you. And then I had a question. You mentioned capacity factor, and I've been hearing that more and more, and I understand the concept of it that like, if you need 1,000 megawatts of solar, like actual, that you can't just install rated 1,000 megawatts of solar. But what sort of things are like the limiting components to generate the capacity factor for like solar development?
So I would say design of the, well, one resource, so depending where the project's sited, if you're if you're putting a solar project in the mountains of Colorado versus the desert of Arizona, the generation is just going to be significantly higher in Arizona than it would be in Colorado with clouds and snow and, all that. So I think location's one aspect, but also design, spacing and what land you have. So if you are targeting a 300 megawatt project and you needed X amount of acres to make it perfect, but let's say you were a little bit short, it doesn't mean you can't hit the 300 megawatt target, but you may have to reduce the spacing, which could in turn reduce the generation and lower the NCF. So it's kind of a balancing act. But I think really design of the actual facility based off the land you have and also the resource that you have are the two main drivers for the capacity factors.
Thank you. And you said you mentioned NCF at the end. What would the N stand for?
It's net capacity factor.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
So the percentage, so if you're, in Arizona for solar, you're looking at 30 to 35% NCF, which is really good for solar. That's basically saying 35% a year the facility's operating at full capacity. And then, just to give you a wind example, wind capacity factors in southeastern Colorado, you're high 40s, low 50s. So, even better. So it's just, wind, if you put a wind project in Arizona, the wind resource isn't as strong, but it's still economical and, needed to balance the grid. I think with wind and solar, the production profiles complement each other. So when you're talking about these gigawatts amounts of generation that are needed, it's a combination of wind, solar, storage to kind of balance that system out. And, the wind is generally better at night and during the winter months, where solar is better during the day and during the summer. So you kind of have the offsetting generation profiles. And then when you throw in the storage aspect, you can kind of more or less create close to a base load. It's not going to be perfect, but you're getting much higher NCFs if you kind of had a hybrid project, for example, where when there's too much solar on the grid, you can charge the battery with your solar, and then when there's not enough, you can discharge the battery. So it's a very complex system, and these utilities are always balancing their system and making sure that they're going to have the generation available when it's needed.
Awesome. Thank you.
I had a question too. Jake said it really well earlier, but there really is like a balancing act of, looking at policy, local stakeholder interests, and trying to understand like who you're working with and what's even possible. You can say these projects can go on for years and years. And, you mentioned this like good neighbor agreement. I'd never heard of that before. Is that like a door-to-door thing? You go and look for people, you look at different like potential like points of interest of where you're gonna like do sites and stuff, and you go and like find people in these areas and you try to map things out. It seems like a very like you said, a very complex system. I imagine there's lots of teams of people that handle different subsections of this to tackle it. And when one hits a roadblock, it can stop the whole project in lots of different areas. Have you guys had like lots of firsthand experience with this? Like any sort of like stories of this balance between like policy and trying to get this project, off the shelf and into the hands of people?
It's a great question. It's a big question with a lot of different ways to go, but I think I'll take a stab at it. And if happy to elaborate.
Sorry, yeah, I didn't mean to be so open-ended. It's just like
It's a great question. I think where I'd start is I think early engagement with communities is critical because you want to build relationships and trust with the jurisdiction that you're in. So that's elected officials, that's planning commission, that's chamber of commerce, economic development. I mean, just really ingraining yourself in the community to understand what drives the community, what are their concerns, so that you can start working with them and educating them and tailoring your project to fit their needs. But beyond that, I mean, you have to analyze the individual counties' zoning regulations for whether it's wind or solar to understand what their setbacks are, what their requirements are, so that you can plan to hit those milestones for when you start your permitting process. And then once you kind of have an understanding of like the community and what drives them, I mean, you're going to start working with the actual private landowners and working with them to sign leases, transmission easements, underground collection easements. I mean, there's a lot of documents that we work with landowners on based off of what they are comfortable having on their property. So we always start with a lease because that's the most bang for the buck, because you get a lot of rights. You get turbine or solar panel siting, you get underground collection, you get setbacks. Like there's a lot of kind of things ingrained in a wind or a solar lease. But if that landowner does not want a wind turbine or solar panels on his property, then you kind of go to step 2. And that would be, what are you comfortable with? Maybe they don't want solar panels, but they're fine with a transmission easement or an underground collection easement. And that adds value to the project because we have to have contiguous land to make these projects work. Now, where the good neighbor agreements come into play is if you're talking to these landowners and they don't want wind or solar on their property, they don't want transmission, whether it's above ground or underground, but they are pro property rights, and they're like, hey, if my neighbor wants to have wind turbines or solar panels on his property, then go for it. And I'm not going to stop him, and I'm willing to sign a good neighbor agreement, which is basically waiving, some larger setbacks from the non-participating property line. So there's still a significant value to these good neighbor agreements. And I think the example I gave on this Minnesota project, it was just the state has a really significant setback from non-participating property. So these agreements were very critical. But in other states where they don't have these large setbacks, these agreements are still used because we want people to be part of the project and we want them to feel like they're getting something and part of it, even though that they may not want wind or solar or any other facilities on their property, they're still, in close proximity to the project and they're going to be impacted, whether that's from like a view shed or sound or whatever it is, depending on the technology.
Gotcha. It's very interesting. Yeah. And I guess the other question I have, maybe this is like an apex wide kind of a question of concern, but something that we've been learning about in our studies and at this recent solar conference we went to is about like grid vulnerability, reliability, and like flexibility, and how there's like emerging technologies coming out that are supposed to kind of help these issues. And I know that when you're, building some sort of like large, like utility scale solar or wind farm, and the amount of energy and like power output from these places can be very, very beneficial. We're talking about thousands of megawatts, depending, like generally speaking, across all projects. But in the next coming years, the demand of energy, like the energy draw from the grid, is, I think, if I recall correctly, expected to surpass. Don't quote me on this number. I could be very wrong, but if I remember correctly, it was well over 1,000 gigawatts nationally, like across the entire nation. And a lot of that has to do with like data centers and general population increase, this electrification of rural areas. How does Apex like tackle these grid issues? Like if there's vulnerability or like an increase in demand. We talked about like grid forming technologies. I don't know, just explore on the topic.
Well, I mean, that's going to vary by state and by region. I think one, I'll give you, because we've worked a lot in Colorado and Arizona, which Isabella has the slide up for. I think what was really great from in Colorado standpoint was Xcel Energy has these renewable energy goals and targets, and they realized like the transmission infrastructure that they have today just is not going to get them anywhere close to these goals. So what they did is they went out and built, I think it was about a 500 or so mile, 345 kV transmission loop, basically from the North Denver metro area over into the Eastern Plains, down to the southeastern part of the state, over to Pueblo, back up to the south side of the Denver metro. And that line was designed and built to bring a large amount of wind and solar projects online. So they did a lot of the legwork for us developers in that scenario, which was awesome and I would say a huge success. Whereas in other states, it's not that simple because the utilities aren't doing similar transmission build-outs like they are. So it creates some challenges, but it's a balancing act of bringing the generation on, but also planning to build new transmission. So in Arizona, these utilities are always looking to bring and build out new transmission to free up capacity and, just shift flows to make it more of like an optimized grid. So there's always kind of transmission infrastructure improvements, but they're not to the scale that Xcel Energy did in Colorado. So what that does for us and what we have to do is we look at we cite our projects, like we're looking at points of interconnect that have capacity, have transmission availability to get the power to load centers. So we have to go through a queue process where we file a queue position with whatever utility we're tying into. They study our project, they'll tell us how much the network upgrades are going to be so that our project can come online. And then depending on the utility you're working with, sometimes those are reimbursed, sometimes those costs are worn by the developer and then folded into the price that we offer in an RFP. So there's kind of, it's very utility, state, region specific. So I can't, I'd have to go one by one, but usually those costs are covered by the developer in some states, but not in others. So, but in terms of like broader transmission planning and all of that, I mean, we're always monitoring it, but like we don't have much influence in a lot of that stuff. Like we can opine and weigh in on things, but a lot of that's at a much higher level, more in like a regional basis. Right now we're seeing SPP Markets Plus coming into play. We're still educating ourselves on that, but that's basically combining Arizona utilities with Colorado utilities with some other states in the region. But then you have, California is kind of tying in with Nevada, which is then going to be tying in with New Mexico. So it's kind of like a crisscross, and there's a lot of education, and this is all just kind of in the forming stages. And, we have a lot of homework to do to see how that's going to change things in the Western region. So the market's constantly changing, but as it says at the top of the slide, I mean, WECC is not an RTO. It's, each of these states and each of the utilities are kind of their own independent operating unit, where when you look at the map and you see SPP, Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, South Dakota, and a little bit of the panhandle of Texas, that's all functioned under SPP, which is a regional transmission operator. So you're filing a queue position with SPP, no matter which state you're in that region. But in WECC, it's not like that. So you're filing a queue position with the utility that owns the substation, and then you have to navigate the transmission accordingly.
Wow. Yeah, I had no idea. That's very interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a great question.
Yeah, I'll add to that just a little bit. Your topic of grid reliability and sort of matching that. How can we add renewables to fit that goal. Yeah, I know storage is, particularly in Arizona, paired with solar, sort of helps with that issue. But yeah, like Dylan said, our strategies, sort of vary among region. So this map sort of highlights that pretty well.
And just kind of a fun fact, but I mean, like SPP, I think they have the most wind generation out of any of their regions, and they have a very reliable grid. So it can be done. I don't remember what the number it'd be. I should have looked, but they have gigawatts and gigawatts and gigawatts of wind in SPP, and they've been successful in managing it and not having any like brownouts or blackouts or anything. So it's impressive and it can be done, but it requires planning and forecasting and getting believe it or not, getting meteorologists involved, because they can predict what the winds are going to be like in certain regions. And the SPP can be like, oh, well, we have a lot of wind down here, so there's going to be a lot of wind generation coming in from Oklahoma on Wednesday, but all the wind's going to be coming in from Kansas on Thursday. So they can kind of manage and balance their system even like a day ahead and plan for what the weather's going to be.
That's really nice, actually. I hadn't even considered that. And maybe even communication across, providers or however it works. Like if we know something's going across this way and, if we have wind production in Louisiana or something, Yeah. I don't have any other questions. I'm sorry.
No, those are great
Hand it to
questions.
you, Remy.
Thank you for that. And this was fantastic. I just wanted to share one last slide with you all. Just as a reminder that this is the last of our summer webinar series. But we are starting the academic year webinar series, which is a monthly call on the third Wednesday of every month at 2 p.m. Eastern time. And they are recorded. So if you can't make it because of your class schedule, don't worry about it. You can always subscribe to the YouTube channel and get in there and watch them. But I just wanted to kind of give you a little preview of some of the folks that we have lined up for this semester. So we do expect to have the American Solar Energy Society joining us to talk specifically about how to start student club or student chapter at your university. We are hoping to have the folks from Pocket Meter, which have a really cool piece of instrumentation that could be really neat in some of your research projects or your classwork. And then some other folks from around our sponsors, East Point Energy, Google, and AES. East Point Energy is a battery storage company, so we'll be definitely talking about how the role that storage is playing. AES is a solar and wind developer, and of course we all know who Google is, but they are a purchaser of our renewable energy, so we love to have them on talking about the good things that they're doing in powering themselves with renewable energy. And Apex, right? Isn't that that's the Rocky Forge customer? Is that correct? So
I don't remember. It might be Google. I think you're right. But
I think I saw that.
we work with Google a lot. So we've done multiple transactions with them.
Wonderful. Well, anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there. Keep an eye on our social media. You should have received a calendar invite already. If you haven't, make sure to sign up on the website for the College Student Network, and you'll get added to that monthly invitation to join us. So with that, I will let you go, and you might not even hear me because my internet is unstable. I don't know. But thank you again, Dylan and Bella, and I look forward to seeing you guys again soon.
Yeah.
Thanks,
thank you.
everyone.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
You bet. Thank you, guys.
Thanks for your time, guys.
Yeah, thank you.